Loretta Hayes from Hayes Sewing Machine Company in Wilmington, Delaware, and welcome back to our creative videos. Today we were going to do, Pam and I thought it would be great to go back to basics because we often get questions about rotary cutting. Whether a person is new to rotary cutting or they've been rotary cutting for quite a while but feel like they're not getting a really accurate cut, or it's not going as quickly as they thought it would go. So we thought we'd do a little bit of back to basics. So the very first thing that you need for rotary cutting is you need a rotary mat. So that's like this here. It's a self-healing mat. So when you cut with the rotary cutter, because the rotary cutter is like a pizza wheel for fabric, it's super sharp. It will cut your fabric, and if you don't have a mat, it will cut your table. So definitely need to have a mat. Now this mat here is a 24 by 36. It's a great mat. It's really pretty colored, which is the reason why we brought it, so it would look good on film. However, as a quilter, you really could get away with an 18 by 24. So if you're just brand new to rotary cutting and you need to get the supplies, an 18 by 24 mat is going to be definitely sufficient. You're not going to feel squeezed when you're cutting your fabric. So that's your first thing, rotary mat. Second thing is rotary cutter. Now, if you are new to rotary cutting, you're going to go and you're like, okay, cool, I need to have a mat, I need to have a cutter. So you go to the rotary cutters and you go, oh my word, there are so many choices. What one do I pick? So a couple of things for you to kind of consider. There are basically three sizes. I'll lift them up, Pam. There are three sizes of rotary cutters available for quilting. So the size of the cutter isn't really the handle. The size of the cutter is the blade. So this one is a 28 millimeter blade. This one is a 45 millimeter blade. And this one is a 60 millimeter blade. So what's awesome about all of these cutters is they'll all cut through. But if you've been rotary cutting for a little bit and you have, say, a 28 millimeter, you will find that you have to press a little harder on a 28 millimeter. So my favorite rotary cutter is the 45 millimeter. So the 45 millimeter is kind of in the middle. I can cut straight things with the 45 millimeter cutter, and I can do curve things. So if I'm like cutting around, I'm not quilting per se, I'm just cutting out a pattern. So I might have like armholes to go around, neck edges. It'll pivot really, really well. The 60 is fabulous if you are doing things where you're working with thicker fabrics. So maybe you're not so much a quilter, but you do home deck type things. So you might be using like upholstery weight fabric. The larger the cutter, the less pressure that we have to do to get through those thicker fabrics. However, the 60 millimeter cutter is not very flexible. So it's great if you're like doing pillows where you're cutting straight things, but if you're doing lots of curves, you're not going to be real happy with this one. So it's like, is it too hard, too soft, or just right? I like the 45 millimeters because I think it's just right for pretty much all of your cutting needs. So that narrows down that choices. You're looking at all those cutters. You're like, okay, which one do I pick? So you can narrow it down to the 45s. But that's not all, okay? Because you have a choice between a straight handled cutter and an ergonomically handled cutter. And really the big thing on these is that the covers pull away from the blades. So all rotary cutters have some sort of cover so that you don't inadvertently cut yourself when you're picking it up. So the straight cutter has a little arrow on this piece here, and it pulls this away. And maybe if I flip it around here, you'll see the black cutter expose that silver blade. All right, so for this one, I have to manually take and pull it up and put it back in. On this one here, the ergonomically done one, Pam's going this way, you release that cover by squeezing the cutter. Now, when I squeeze this, it doesn't move. So what we have to do is we have to press the red button, okay, and you can see the blade will expose. But when I set this down on the table, it automatically closes up my cover. Okay, if you're putting it in the drawer, you press the red button and that's going to put it back. Now, I would say that most people will do best with this one. However, my favorite one is actually the straight one because I'm left-handed, and left-handed people tend to do things with both hands. And so this one I can flip over and I can get my blade next to the ruler. So you'll see me cutting with both right and left hands here today. But it does mean that you do need to push this back, and I am notoriously bad about that. But if you have kids or animals, you got to get that cover back up because you don't want a kitty to come up and start playing and have a problem. All right? All right, so we have selected our rotary cutter. Last thing for doing rotary cutting with quilting is you need a rotary ruler. So the rotary ruler is going to allow you to get measurements, and it's giving you a hard surface to cut against. If you were to take a wooden yardstick, you could go ahead and cut with that, but you would only get a few cuts out of it because literally the cutter would take bits of wood off of the side of the ruler, and you would start to get a divot and you wouldn't be able to cut straight. So you need to have a ruler that's designed for the rotary cutting. My favorite ruler, if you're just getting started, the most versatile ruler that there is the 6x24. So we've got the 6 this way, we've got 24 there. You'll also see that there are some lines on here. There's a 45-degree line, there's a 60-degree line, and a 30-degree line. So in a little bit, I'm going to show you how to cut a couple of shapes, and we're going to use those lines. So every 6x24 ruler has those lines. It's very unusual not to have those lines. All right, so that's our first ruler. If you've been rotary cutting for a while, you know a girl needs her choices. So the second most popular ruler to work with is a 12.5, because we can cut strips with this one, but we can cut big blocks with this one. So if I wanted to do a 9-inch block, I would not have to do any pencil marking on my fabric. I could just use the ruler from here. So super awesome ruler for that. And then if you've got those two, probably the next most popular is like a 6. Because yes, I could cut a 6-inch block with my 12.5-inch ruler, but how cool is it that I can just go around the blocks, you know, so I don't have to look at measurements. I can just go around the edges for this one. So if you're doing a lot of scrap quilts and you're going to be cutting like 6-inch blocks, you know, super cool ruler to do. And just so that you know, there are all kinds of crazy things. I mean, I just pulled a couple off of the pegboard today. So they make like little baby ones, they make triangle ones, they make 60-degree triangle ones. So you can do all kinds of different shapes. But what you need to get started for basic work is that 6x24 ruler. That's going to get you most of the shapes that you need. Alrighty. So now we've got our 3 things. We've got our mat, we've got our cutter, and we've got our ruler. We are now looking at that. We now need to start cutting fabric. So the very first thing that you need to do when you are looking at your fabric is that your fabric needs to be prepped for rotary cutting. If your fabric came off the bolt and the salvage edges are like perfectly even, then you're ready to cut. However, how often do you see this, where your salvages are off, that, you know, are just slightly off, maybe a slight diagonal going on there? And it's super important that we get that straightened up, because if we don't get that straightened up, when we go to cut our strip, instead of having a straight strip, we're going to have a strip that has a little bit of a wonk. And that is the #1 question that I get from people who have been rotary cutting. Like, I can't get my strips perfectly straight. So this is the key to that. So what you want to do is you want to look at your piece of fabric. You want to go ahead and you want to get the edges lined up. And if the edges are not lined up, you're looking at these 2 edges here, the ones at the top, not the ones on the side. So like if you're, let me pull this off. Do you see how there's a diagonal pull? There may not be on the front there. There's one on the back. Hang on for a second. All right. So you see how you end up with like a diagonal pull going onto the fabric? So what you do is you take those 2 edges, those 2 salvage edges, and you wiggle them back and forth until that diagonal goes away. So I'm not so worried about what's going on these cut edges. I'm just looking at the salvage edges. We're going to take it over to the ironing board. I start pressing from the salvage edge end. And we'll work our way along. And so what's going to happen is you're going to end up repressing that fold that's on the end of the edge of the bolt. Now, sometimes when you press that fold, it doesn't come out super easily. So don't forget about Mary Ellen's Best Press. You can go ahead and you can spray the whole thing. I actually like using the Mary Ellen's Best Press in the fact that it gives my fabric a little bit more body. So once again, I'm coming back to my salvage edges, making sure those are lined up, and I'm pushing any of the excess. Get this on the board a little bit. So I'm repressing that fold. If you need it in math terms, what we're doing is we're making the salvage edge and the fold parallel to each other. That's what we're after. All right, so once we're pressed, we're going to head back over here to the board. We're going to put the salvage edges away from us. So that's on this end. We're going to take the fold and we're going to fold the fold up to the salvage edge. Now, sure. So Loretta, why would I do that? The reason why you do this is because when we go to cut, the further away from my body that I get, the more likely this ruler is to tip. And that is probably the second most common complaint of rotary cutting, is that, oh, I'm always slipping and having to go back and straighten up my edge. So the very first thing we're going to do is by taking that fold of the fabric and lining that up with the salvage edge, which are nice and straight. So once again, we're getting 2 parallel edges on our fold. Now we can come in and we can cut, and we don't have to get hugely away from our body. So having 11 inches to cut as opposed to 22 inches to cut is going to make everything super easy to do. All right, so our first thing that we do once we've got our fabric prepped on the board is we're going to come in and we're going to line up one of the lines on the 6 by 24 ruler, and I'm going to line it up right along the fold of the fabric. Now, something that's interesting, some people use the lines on the board to help them square up, and that's perfectly fine, but I use the lines on top of the ruler. And the reason why I use the lines on the top of the ruler is because they are on top. I find that I'm much more accurate when I'm looking at the marks on top of the material rather than having the marks under the material. So technically, I could have my fabric like this, although it would drive my OCD crazy, because I'm not paying any attention to the marks that are on that board. I am strictly looking at this mark going here. So we'll go ahead and cut this one, and then we'll put it back because it's freaking me out. All right, so I'm going to line it up. I've got a line. I don't care about the measurement. I'm just looking for a line going across the ruler. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to be cutting up this edge. So what I need to be doing is I need to be trimming all 4 layers. Now in this particular example, yay, the shorter piece is on the top, so it's easier for you to see in the camera. However, oftentimes the shorter piece is on the bottom. So take the time to kind of check it out before you start cutting. So you're going to go ahead, you're going to line this up, you're going to put your hand on the ruler, and the key to the holding the ruler easily, if you're just doing it with your hand, is to use the pads of your fingers. So you'll see I'm kind of up here. I'm not like this, because see how this is going to twist really easily? So we can go ahead and we can line up that. Okay, we get it lined up, we remove our cover. I'm going to start my cutting before my fabric. So I'm about 1 inch before the material comes, and you'll notice that I am pushing away from my body. Nothing freaks a teacher out more than when you start cutting towards yourself. Just looks like an urgent care visit. So away from your body. You'll notice also that when I'm holding my cutter, this is a straight cutter, you'll notice there's ridges on this cutter when you look at one closely. So I have my finger on that cutter so that I can push down. It gives me a little bit of torque. When you're working with the ergonomic ones, they also have those ridges, so you can put your finger up there and have a little bit more pressure. So this is what books will refer to as cleaning an edge. What we're doing is we're getting a straight edge that is perpendicular to our fold. No matter how well the fabric was cut at the store, it's never straight enough for when you're cutting blocks. So you always want to clean the edge. Now, I cut this as a right-handed person would, because most of you are going to be right-handed. However, if you are left-handed, you would be on the left-hand end of the fabric. So on the right-hand one, I didn't really mention that. Right-handed, you're cleaning the right-hand edge of your fabric. Left-handed, you're going to be cutting on the left hand. It is exactly the same thing, just with the opposite hand. So I'm lining up the line. So you can see here, this is my example of, you know, when the fabric is a little shorter underneath. So we can go in and we can do that. And then you're going to be up on the pads of your fingers. We're going to be cutting before we get to the fabric. And boom, we'll go in. If you have a little, you know, didn't go through, go ahead and do that before you move your ruler. All right, now, so somebody says to me, yes, Loretta, but I have been cutting for a long time and I still have issues with the ruler sliding. So a couple of things to make your life easier. The first thing, and the thing that I use the most, is called Handy Grip. Now, Handy Grip was designed for quilting rulers. So you may have seen other videos of mine where I used Handy Grips on my quilting rulers. But this is wonderful stuff. You can use it for your rotary rulers as well. So Handy Grip is kind of a clear sandpaper type thing. It allows you it won't rub off like sandpaper does, but you can see your markings through the ruler. It's not going to interfere with that. So what you do, Handy Grip comes in strips like this. So this is what it looks like out of the package. So you've got like this, and you'll see it has like 1-inch grids on it, and I gotta say, I don't use it as a 1-inch grid. What you're gonna do is you're gonna get a rough pair of scissors, not your gingers, okay? And we're gonna cut a little section of Handy Grip off. And so we can then come in, peel the paper backing, which may be the most challenging on this video. All right, there we go. And we're going to place that behind the ruler. So you can stick that, but you can see, and you can place it anywhere. On my ruler at home, I have 4 on the corners, and I've got like 1 on either side. So we can go through. But you can see that you can still see your markings with the handy grip. It's not opaque, it's not blocking it out. All right, so now when things are cutting, you'll feel that like the ruler doesn't want to slide on the fabric at all. So that way when you're cutting against your ruler, it's not going to be slipping to the right or the left. All right, so we now have cleaned an edge. Now, you are not cleaning both edges. When I do this demo, I should do a different piece of fabric. You're going to clean the one edge. So I'm going to cut right-handed here. I clean my right-hand edge, and then what you're going to do is you're going to take that right-hand edge and you're going to flip it over here to the left. Because if you don't, if you keep your you've cleaned it on the right-hand edge, then what happens is you're holding your ruler like this and you're trying to do this, okay? You're trying to cut like this, which is really awkward. So by flipping your fabric over, you're now going to come over here and you're going to cut, line up your lines there, okay? And we're just going to go ahead and we're going to cut this way so it's natural flow. Your right hand is on that right-hand side of the ruler, but you're just cutting straight across. So let's say that you want to cut a 4.5-inch strip. So the 4.5-inch strip, you're going to look at the lines. You have big lines, you've got medium lines, and you've got little bitty lines. So the big lines are the inches, the medium lines are 1/4 inches, and the little itty bitty lines are 1/8 of an inch. So we're going to do 4.5, so we're going to count 4 big lines, and I'm going to do a half, which is 1/4 and 1/4, so 2 little lines. And that's exactly how I think of it. When we start to get like lots of measurements, you know, I go 4 big lines, 2 little lines. That's how I think of it in my brain. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to line this up. So we have our 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 2 medium. We're going to make sure that this is lined up here, and a little trick is if you're uncertain, line up both this line here and pick a line at the bottom so that you're lined up. That way you know you're square. So now we're going to come in, we're going to be up on the pads of our fingers, okay, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut across. I can then pull my fabric and see if it separates. If I cut across and I didn't cut through, which is the 3rd most common problem with rotary cutting, what I tell my students is try and listen to it when you're cutting. You'll hear there's kind of like little skips there. So now when I pull the fabric doesn't come away. But I haven't moved my ruler. So all I have to do is go back and pick those up. Where we get into problems is when we pick up our ruler and then try and reline it back up. We get that kind of shredded edge. So super, super simple, easy to do. If you were doing it left-handed, you would just do the opposite. So we would be on this side. We would count 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 medium lines for our 4.5. Line up our bottom line here. And boom, we're good to go. So we can cut strips, but we can also cut blocks. So if I wanted to cut 4.5-inch blocks, I'm going to do a simple, easy scrap quilt. The whole process starts again. So this is where the strip was. We're just going to flip the strip around. We have salvage edges, which we don't want. We have a fold, which we don't want. So we're going to start by cleaning the edge. So once again, we're going to line up our line going across the bottom. so that we have a nice clean edge. I'm going to scooch back far enough that I can take those salvages off. I'm going to flip my fabric, so you should hear me droning in your ear. It's clean flip, and then you're going to come in and we're going to do 4.5 again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 2 lines is going to give us 4.5. And so we have just cut 4 squares super fast. Look at my square here. I didn't quite get my my salvage edge there, so make sure you cut enough. So we've got 3 perfect ones. This one, by the way, would work because the salvage edge is in the 1/4 inch seam allowance, but we like it better than that. All right, so that's squares. If you want a rectangle, so let's say we want a 4.5 by 2.5 rectangle, the only thing that's going to be different is we're going to come in and we're going to count 2.5. So 2 big lines and 2 medium lines. And so we cut our rectangle and we've got rectangle shapes. So super, super easy to do. Now, if you're doing unusual shapes, say, let's say a diamond shape, this is where you're working with the lines that are on the ruler that I mentioned earlier. So if I was doing a diamond shape, you look at these lines and you go, but I can't rotary cut through that. How does that work? So let's say we want to do a 45-degree diamond. What's going to happen is we're going to line up our 45-degree line with our cut edge, and now this side of the ruler is going to be exactly a 45 degrees. So I don't actually have to clean this one because this is all going to be scrap anyway. So we can come in and we can cut that. So we have our 45 degree. Now, oftentimes then I have people going, all right, so now I got to get this going like this or whatnot. Remember, once you get your 45 degree set up, that's the equivalent of cleaning it. You're going to flip the edge. This is 4.25, right? And so we'll come in and we'll do 4.5 again. And voila, we have 45-degree diamonds. You can do triangles. If you were doing that same 45 degree, so let's line up on the 45 degree. Let's get those out of the way. So 45 degree, we'll come in there. Okay, and then we flip it over and we can line up the 45 degree line. Sure we can. There we go. So we've got the 45 degree here. So this is where being left-handed is really nice because I don't have to flip the fabric. I could just go that way, but flip it over and go for the 45 degree. So just rock your ruler over. And line her up. So you see your 45 degree triangle. So boom, we've got 45 degree triangles to go together. So there are lots of shapes that you can do with your rotary ruler. If you still have trouble with your ruler slipping and sliding, the quilting world is a wonderful world of gadgets. So they have made many gadgets to kind of help you. Some of them big, some of them small. This one here is a handle. So you can see you put your fingers through it. Can I get close enough, Pam? We good? And so it's got little suction cups, and they suction cup to your ruler, and you can use that as your handle. So that's one possibility. the Gypsy Quilter Company has made 2 types of kind of suction cups. So this one here, it's suction cups. See how you can pick up your ruler? So what happens is you can then hold on to the ruler this way instead of spreading your hand out going this direction. So very cool. I find that this is super helpful if someone has trouble with their hands. If you have maybe a little bit of arthritis, this might be a good option. And then the last one, I have to break it out of the box, ladies. There we go. I always refer to this one as the telephone.
We're showing our age.
Yeah, yeah, because, you know, the kids are going to be like, yeah, that doesn't look like a cell phone. All right, so this one here, you take it and put it like this and press down. And once again, so this one you can hold like this. I mean, this has got a wonderful grip going on it, and you can slide that through. Cool. So there are many, many things that you can do to make your rotary cutting more accurate, easier to do, and definitely much more fun to do. You know, if you can cut it straight the first time, it's way more fun than having to cut multiple strips to do that. So the things to take away, the very first thing is that you need to prep your fabric. I find that a lot of the problems are right in that. Make sure those salvage edges are lined up, press them, repress the fold, use your Mary Ellen's best press if the fold doesn't want to come out, and then make sure that you're folding it in half again. So much easier to cut an 11-inch width of fabric rather than a 22-inch width of fabric. And then don't forget about all the cool things that quilters have developed. I'm a big fan of gadgets. I'm Gadget Girl. But, you know, they've not only had the idea, they invented it, they marketed it. I'm like, you know, yay, I'm going to work with it. So for me, I use the Handy Grip most often. But once again, if you have issues with your hands, don't forget about these other products where they basically put handles on your ruler, so it makes it much easier for you to do. So I hope this was helpful, and we will see you again next time for our creative videos.